Good morning. It's a cool and somewhat little wet morning here in Singapore. It's nice weather for a change. And I think a very quick introduction about myself, just to kickstart this process. As I've been introduced by AJ, my name is Chye. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cynopsis Solutions, a RegTech company that specializes in end-to-end AML, KYC, SaaS products. We're founded and headquartered in Singapore, help clients to achieve regulatory advantage by combining deep regulatory knowledge that we have with functional technologies that we built and we ensemble. Now, at the same time, I also chair the RegTech subcommittee of Singapore FinTech Association, and also the founding member of the Regulatory and Compliance Committee of Blockchain Association of Singapore. And on a part-time basis, I teach compliance at International Compliance Association, and I sit on the Singapore Education Advisory Board as a board member. Now, back to RegTech. At SFA RegTech Subcommittee, we define, which Mona is also a member of, we define RegTech as any company that uses technology, any forms of technologies, including new or emerging techniques to assist the financial services industry participants to achieve better regulatory outcome. And to Mona's point, where the applications of RegTech goes beyond financial services sector, the concept remains the same. You're using technology with a certain level of industry knowledge to achieve a better regulatory outcome, be it financial services, pharmaceutical, medical, telco, and so on and so forth. So there could be a lot of applications to that. Now, financial services sector, obviously, as we all know, a lot of us come from that sector before or even currently operating in that sector. It's a very highly regulated sector. And the potential effects of getting things wrong, be it market manipulation, conduct issues, mis-selling, conflict of interest, and so on, can be extremely, extremely detrimental for organization as well as for the financial stability of a country, a region, or even, to the very connected global financial system, as we have seen in, like, for example, the GFC. So it takes many, many years to remedy that and to put in place proper safeguards and measures at the country level as well as at the international level. So today, I'm very honored to be invited by RegPac to moderate this panel of expert speakers to explore how RegTech is shaping compliance functions, or more generally, risk management functions in a digital age. Now, in my view, RegTech is no longer a good to have, but more of a must have in order for organizations to stay competitive, yet remain compliant with the ever increasing regulation. So I'm just going to do a very quick round the table with my esteemed panelists, and they'll do a quick introduction about themselves. And then we'll go into a few questions that I have prepared. And for the audience that we have today, feel free to post questions to the Q&A session, and we will answer them as much as to the best of our ability. So we've got about an hour or so to run this. So we have a very, very comfortable we can do this in a very comfortable pace without actually having to rush through things like what most panels may be faced with. Now, first up, I'm glad to be joined by Mr. Alban Salord, who has extensive experience in areas of financial crime. And currently, Alban works with HSBC. Alban, would you like to take a few minutes to do a quick introduction about yourself and just share with the audience your areas of expertise again?
Sure, thank you, Chye. So Alban Salord, as Chye said, I work with HSBC, where I'm the head of business financial crime risk for Asia Pacific for the retail bank. So that overlooking all of the controls that pertain to financial crime risk. I've got a keen interest in technology because it is transforming the way we work every day and make us work better, faster, stronger. And it allows to free up capacity to do more value-add sort of tasks, trying to mitigate financial crime risk. So it is a great tool to use to be able to detect and deter financial crime risk. I'm also a mentor with R3 and F10, mentoring startups in the fintech, RegTech space. So really sort of taking a keen interest in how this is developing and trying to assist, in the development of RegTech in Singapore, which is why I'm here today to speak with you.
Yeah, excellent. And and you're moving house today, yeah? I'm assuming, especially to come up to do this, and we greatly appreciate it. All right, okay, cool. Next we have Mr. Trilochan Sehgal from Daon, and Trilochan has about more than 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity, identity management, and even business administration. So over to you, Trilochan.
Hi, thanks, Chye. Good morning, everyone. This is Trilochan, and as Chye mentioned, work for Daon. I've just joined them about 3 months back as a regional VP to run and grow the business in Southeast Asia. My background, last 8-10 years, I've been operating into identity and access management, and that's been one of the areas where I specialize in, worked with companies like IBM and Beyond Trust in the past. Digital identity is something which I feel is a very powerful way of managing cybersecurity. It's one of the main constituents out there. And this is one thing which has been ever evolving. It was there about, identity and access management was there about 20 years back, and it is still evolving. So happy to be here on this platform to share my views, and thanks for having me on board today.
Yep. And to your point, Trilochan, is absolutely, even I would say even more relevant than before, because a lot of things are happening on the digital front. Be it e-commerce, be it all sorts of even financial transactions are all happening digitally. So the access management, the identity management, as well as cybersecurity is the heart and center of to actually build trust, as well as the right type of ecosystem that we want, and that's where this is a very I would say important and pinnacle aspect of the success of RegTech, fintech, as well as the future of the financial ecosystem in the near future, or even today, right? So last but not least, we are very honored to have Ms. Lee Wan-Si, Director at IMDA in the Department of Trusted AI and Data. And I would like to invite Wan-Si to perhaps introduce herself a little bit more, so that we can know something about her.
Okay, thanks, Chye. First of all, thanks Mona and RegPac for inviting me to today's panel. Very happy to be here. I'm from IMDA. I'm not sure if IMDA is familiar to most of the audience here, so maybe I'll just do a very quick introduction. IMDA stands for Infocomm Media Development Authority. We are the telco and media regulator, and we are also the ones that look after personal data protection as well. So like just last week, we've just put up an act review in Parliament to review the PDPA. That's the Personal Data Protection Act of Singapore. But that's really just the regulatory role that IMDA does. At the broader level, IMDA actually helps to drive the digital economy in Singapore. We work very closely with sectors. By sectors, I mean the different industries in Singapore, whether it's financial services, manufacturing, lifestyle, built environment, and so on. This trade and logistics, of course, these are sectors that we work very closely with the lead agencies to help drive digitalization. We are also the ones responsible for building up the human capital capacity in terms of technology. That means how do we ensure that there's sufficient human tech talent in Singapore to meet the needs of the digital economy here. That's a very quick introduction of what IMDA does. I didn't cover everything, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about IMDA. So coming back to myself, I'm working in trusted AI and data. What does that mean? Essentially, my role is to help build a trusted ecosystem around AI and data. For AI, the very specific thing I do is really driving AI governance within Singapore ecosystem. That means how do we encourage companies to use AI more responsibly, and in implementing AI, how do they ensure that it is done with without bias, with transparency, and ensure that they can explain what the AI does to the customers and stakeholders. So that's one of the areas that I do in AI. In terms of data, really it's about how then do we encourage the use of data in a trusted way to facilitate sharing and movement of data within the ecosystem. Because data is really important, it's the foundation of the digital economy, but at the same time we want to make sure that as companies leverage on data, they also know how to protect it, how to maintain privacy, but more importantly, right, it's also how then do they make sure that there's trust between them and their stakeholders. Stakeholders could be business partners, could be their consumers, could be the stakeholders within the organization in terms of how the data is used and shared. Yeah. So that's a very quick introduction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And for the audience benefit as well. I mean, IMDA obviously works very closely with all the rest of the government agencies, you know, and one of those things that people typically will be looking for is funding, grants, money. So IMDA works very closely with like people like ESG, Enterprise Singapore, you know, to have to work, and as well as to work with vendors or as well as solutions providers across the country, you know, to come up with productivity in PSG grant, in short PSG. So these grants actually help to push along the journey of digitization as well as the adoption of solutions to make things, I suppose, a lot more automated as well as a lot more seamless, faster, better, and even cheaper. So there's a lot of that effort that I think is a great example that the public sector is working together with the private sector, at the same time pushing the country ahead in the smart nation vision. So we're going to talk about that smart nation vision in a while in one of those questions that I'm going to ask anyway. So thanks for the very interesting introduction from Wansi, and just holding you on the spot for a moment. Maybe you can go first as the first question that I'll ask. Now, in your own respective roles, currently or even before, you know, how do you see or think RegTech has evolved since the term was first introduced by, you know, FCA, meaning Financial Conduct Authority in the UK in 2017? Because, you know, the background to this is that, you know, we were these days we're very fixated about terminologies, yeah. So terms like fintech, RegTech, wealth tech, you know, and so on and so forth. It's meditech and all that, and edtech even, you know. So there's a lot of these terminology that have been evolved over the last couple of years, and particularly in what where we're in terms of regulatory technology. This term was coined by FCA in 2017 as they saw that, hey, we're pushing for fintech, you know, but at the same time, there's a heaps of regulatory problem that people are facing. So why don't we use technology to solve regulatory problem? That was 2017. Now, fast forward to today, 2020, how do you think the role or the definition or the utilization of this term have evolved? Maybe Wansi, you want to have a go at that first?
Okay, I can try. As you can glean from my introduction of myself, I'm not active in the RegTech space, certainly not in the financial services context of RegTech, right? But I'm coming from then the perspective of the work that I do from IMDA, and where I've seen technology evolve, especially in terms of how organizations are thinking of compliance to, or at least trying to meet the compliance requirements. It's they started to use a lot more of AI, especially recently, in meeting their regulatory requirements. And that's not new. I think everybody in the panel, everybody in the audience probably say, yeah, okay, you know, yes, you know, use of AI in AML and so on, right? To help to address some of the requirements from the regulators. But I think where it is starting to get interesting, and that's really then specific to the area that I'm much more focused on, is that it's not just about introducing, you know, the use of AI for AML, for example, in the bank, but it's also about how then do you ensure that this AI is done in a way that can, how do I put this? It's done in a way that is that meets also the regulatory requirements. So it's not just about the AML part of it, right? It's also how the AI is system is used, how the machine learning algorithm is used, right? So that's the part that is starting to become quite interesting. So banks, for example, are starting to ask more of their machine learning models, right? To say, hey, can we understand a little bit more about how then these decisions are made, or how then are these patterns recognized, and so on. And that's where I think it's where we have evolved quite a bit in the last 5 years, in terms of moving, not just in terms of using technology, but also using technology in a way that's responsible.
Yeah, I think that's a very good, I would say, setting that you've just put out here, which is actually very important, because at the end of the day, technology does not exist for the sake of it being there. You know, you gotta do something, and typically you gotta do something for the purpose of actually human wanting some outcomes to be achieved, right? And one of those outcomes that nobody wants is to just say that this is a black box and I do not know what's happening within the black box. And that's where, you know, the point about, you know, wanting to know the model, wanting to know that it's done properly, you know, what, and even and as well, the algorithm itself doesn't actually mean anything unless you ingest data with it, right?
Exactly.
Into it. And then that leads to the other question that you just sort of raised about how you responsibly use data, and whether you use it in a trusted fashion and all that, and all the data privacy comes in. I can see that we are trying to push PDPA into this agenda, which is perfectly fine.
I don't have to, actually, no.
No, which is very relevant, very relevant. I think it's a good thing.
I mean, it's just drawing on your point on data, right? I mean, so like, for example, eKYC is an important part of RegTech as well, right? But then that, how do you access that data to do that? So that's the part that's, again, to make sure that you do it in a proper way, in a way that there's governance, in a way that it can build trust with your consumers.
Okay, I'm just gonna quickly turn to Alban for his thoughts around the evolutions of the RegTech terminology since 2017.
Sure. So I think really in the last 3 years, we've seen the RegTech environment mature quite fast, actually. We've seen a lot of use cases coming to fruition. Back in 2017, it was still a little bit pie in the sky. People said they could do things, but there hadn't really been sort of development that had happened at scale with major financial institutions. And I think that has happened, whether collaborations between key technology partners like Contexa and banks like HSBC and Standard Chartered, or even internally, where a lot of banks are now sort of experimenting, and more than experimenting actually, with that technology, trying to support, in my case, fighting financial crime. I think what's been key in the last 3 years is really the evolution of the regulatory environment around this, and I think Singapore is pioneering the way in a lot of of this, and has provided a lot of support to the ecosystem through sandboxes, but also the grants that you mentioned. I mean, money being that important, so that has been an important development. I think also, we now understand a little bit better the limitations and the possibilities that the technology offers us. I think 3 years ago, it was all a little bit mysterious to a lot of us anyway, who like me are practitioners, but I'm not a technology expert, right? So I think, this has led sort of a better acceptance of the technology by financial institutions. And I think there's not a financial institution today who is not tinkering with it and either collaborating or trying in-house to sort of, or both. I think this is where we are really 3 years on, and an exciting journey.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Trilochan, very quickly, your views on RegTech evolution?
Yeah, so, so what I see is, right, RegTech is, although, the term has been defined in 2017, but then the roots of RegTech is going back to almost 2-3 decades, right? It's something not new. Sure. And now with, organizations like FCA, IRTA, RegTech Association of Australia, this is becoming a more relevant topic, right? There is a governance coming around it. There is a lot more standardization happening in the industry. And what we also see is, right, the RegTech market entering the years, right, after 2014, the number of vendors which have come in, the standards which have come in, that has been tremendous. The kind of money which is going into it, the funding which is going into it, that is helping RegTech evolve very, very fast. in terms of themes and in terms of areas, right? If you really look at, and as some of the other panelists mentioned, in the banking, it is, anti-crime, or AML, customer due diligence. These are the topics which has evolved a lot. And if you really go back to a non-financial segment, PII, that is a very hot topic among a lot of tech players. So we are
Trilochan, you're breaking up a little bit.
Segments, especially when it goes gaming industry, there's a lot of tech which has been adopted and it's continuously evolving in those. Was my voice clear?
I think we might have lost you a little bit, Trilochan. Your connection is breaking up.
Okay, now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sporadically. So, do you want to try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So what I was saying, is right. If we really look at themes and adoption patterns in financial industry, it has primarily been on the AML side of things, eKYC things, managing frauds, right? But there is a lot of adoption which is happening in non-financial segments as well, right? Especially in healthcare, casinos, gaming industry, telcos, where the importance is given a lot to personal information, PDPAs, PIAs kind of scenarios, right? So yeah, we are seeing RegTech getting evolved, and it is evolving at a very, very fast pace today.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So, next up, in Singapore, one of the key vision, as I alluded to earlier on, is to continue, as I understand it, to our competitive edge in the region and to stay relevant globally. Is really to transform ourselves into a smart nation. Now, as such, automation and digitizations are critical in this journey. Now, at a high level, I would like to ask Wan Si, right? Or any other panelists can jump in and share thoughts as well. Now, do you see any success so far or learning points that we have picked up in encouraging businesses, be it financial services space or otherwise, to embrace technology and transfer into the digital age? Now, my focus here primarily is on the smaller, medium-sized enterprises, be it in the FI space or in the non-FI space, because as Alban has mentioned, HSBC and the likes of the Standard Chartered and a lot of banks that I'm aware of, and he used the term beyond experimenting, which is correct, and people are not just playing around with it. Some people are actually implementing it but that's only on the basis that there's sufficient budget and money and resources to do this piece of or to be on this journey. Now, if you flip to the long tail of the market segment, you got a small fund managers, remittance house, and so on and so forth. Do you guys see, or maybe Wan Si, do you see, is there any success in this digitization journey that, as a whole in Singapore, that the financial services sector, the smaller players or the smaller boys can pick up and learn?
Yeah, I think definitely in the last few years, digitalization has come to the fore a lot more, especially this year. I think with what we've experienced this year, I think companies and SMEs especially are starting to see the importance of digitalizing their business. I think you're right that it is a little bit easier if an organization have a lot of resources. It's a little bit easier if they have the capacity within the organization as well, to be able to go on the start the digital transformation journey. So for smaller companies, it is definitely very difficult. That's why I think, as you mentioned earlier, right, the government has tried to put out a lot of help for the smaller companies to sort of be able to access, right, and to use. But I just want to highlight that, grants and so on are not the be all and end all.
Yes.
Certainly not the only kind of tools that we put out there. And if an organization or SME start looking at it from the perspective of what grant can I get to help me with adopting a particular technology, whether it's in logistics or in financial services or in security and so on, then that's probably the wrong starting point. So IMDA recently, actually last year, we started this program called the Digital Acceleration Index. It's actually a tool where we invite organizations to fill out a survey. And in doing so, they actually get to benchmark themselves against where are the other organizations in the same sector, the same size, in other parts of the world as well. And the reason I brought that up is because by going through that process, actually, you can also then understand what is the digitalization journey going to be like, right? So what are the key building blocks, right, of for digital transformation? First, you need to have a very clear a view of how digital is going to be key to your business. So it's not just about adopting packages here, technology there, and so on, right? Yeah. So the organizations buy into that and then look at along the value chain of your activities, right? What are the parts that's important for digitalization? So we call this digitalize to the core, right? At which point, whether it's in terms of reaching out new customers, improving operations, compliance, or supporting functions, HR, finance, and so on, right? Which are the things that then is important in the digitalization? And then you start looking beyond, right? What are the new opportunities for digital products and services that you can start building with it to be part of your business? But most importantly, I think to sustain it is also key to make sure that you have the right capacity within organization. That's about training the people, making sure everybody's bought into that process, not just at the staff level, but also at management as well, right? Yes. So it's end to end. And once you start all these, then you can start looking beyond into using AI more effectively, using data more effectively, and so on. So there's all these step by step that you can take. Yeah,
which means that there's really it's not like it absolutely spot on there that it's like not grant for the sake of the sake of it. Money itself runs out. The grant only lasts for a year. Yep. You bought this solution at 80% discount, so to speak, because the government is funding 80%. Then after that, next year, the price goes up, and then you say, okay, I'm going to ditch it because I can't afford it. Then the digitalization journey is crippled in that sense, which is not going to help you anyway. So it almost says to me that it's like you need to have a complete overhaul of the mindset of the management culture. It's just incidentally, this morning I was having breakfast, I was looking at Facebook and all that. I was come across this advertisement, which is quite funny because it was actually talking about a very traditional SME in Singapore, being introduced to this virtual meeting application that again is eligible for PSG grant. So it's really as rightly as you pointed out, really stems to the point that the people needing to change, the mindset needing to change, and the management needing to support it, and the money that the government is giving is just to kickstart this process so that you don't feel as much pain as you would otherwise, because that would be a big inertia. Because once you ask people to spend money at the full price, nobody's going to do anything, then everything gets stalled. So that's really from the, as we said earlier on, the public-private partnership is perfect. Now, any thoughts from your end on this, Alban?
Yes, actually, from the mentoring I do with sort of startups, I think the money that the government offers is only one part of it. So you have to look at the other part, which is affordability of the solutions that RegTech or FinTech put together. Yes. I think some of the more promising sort of startups are those that actually enable people to do some things they weren't able to do before. Let's take regulatory reporting for small asset managers, which is sort of coming to a regulatory requirement coming in this year. Data management is very expensive when you look at it, but actually one of the startups that I mentor actually came up with a clever, easy plug-and-play solution to actually sort of enable that process. If they price it right, they will have a great product at the right price, and then it's not a question about whether the government is funding it. It's a question as actually this is a price that makes sense for those smaller players. Same thing in the legal tech space, where I've seen, in particular in India, a lot of development around smart contracts for small and medium-sized enterprises, or even individuals, which allow people who were not able to contract before to actually contract at a price that they can afford. So I think there's two sides to the story. There's the funding aspect and the big banks paying millions of dollars in development to companies like Contexa, but actually innovation can happen and should happen at the other end of the spectrum, where you're going to actually be successful not because you sell one product to one bank at a very high price, but because you sell lots of very clever solutions to lots of people and enable them. And I think that's where the conversation needs to get to, is around affordability and technology. I'm not saying it's cheap, but the reality is totally scalable, right? This is why we're able to do what we do today. So I think there needs to be some thinking from the RegTech community around how do we ensure affordability and that people can actually use the technology.
Yes, I mean, absolutely on the affordability thing, right? You can build, I use a car as an example. You can build a Rolls Royce and nobody's going to pay for it, then it's as good as useless, right? Or you can build maybe not a QQ, but you can build a Toyota and it works, and it's reliable and it runs and it gets the job done. It doesn't need to have bells and whistles and it works, and then you improve it along the way. So that's, for example, that's how we run our business as well. So just staying with Alban for a minute here. Now you talk about banks or even your own experience and your own mentorship, with startups around adoption. Price is definitely one of those things. Now, what are the key challenges, right, that you think are faced by financial institutions, large or small, in terms of, we've talked about price, we've talked about, affordability and all that stuff. What are the other challenges that you think exist that is sort of hampering and, the adoption of RegTech solutions, given that we talk about that, it's 2017, that's 3-4 years, you mentioned that it's starting to get better, but how much better? Because a lot of surveys that I've come across seem to be suggesting that there are a lot of banks out there testing, sniffing around, looking at things, but they're not really commercializing it or I would say implementing it across the entire bank. Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of enterprise solutions within every bank, that have been purchased over the last 5, 10, or even 20 years ago. And these are legacy systems, as we call it, be it for regulatory purposes and all that stuff. So trying to bring in let's say a clever or a smart solution that solves one part of the problem, and then you go out and look for many others of such similar one that fits different parts. In my mind, wouldn't that create a Frankenstein of sort over time? What do you think?
Yes, I mean, and talking mostly for sort of the larger financial institutions, but I think one of the key challenge is an internal challenge. It's an organizational challenge. For big organizations, you have a decision center that has quite a number of people who are involved in making the decision to actually sort of go for a particular solution. And unless you educate every single person in that decision center, you might get to an end where, the compliance guy is excited, the technology guy is excited, but the finance guy not so much, and then it doesn't happen, right?
Yes.
So that's one of the key elements, is there is still some lack of understanding within these organizations from people who are decision makers to actually understand what the technology can do and how that's a good investment. So that's one. The second one is really around banks are very focused on new technologies, but I'm not going to say unfortunately, but mostly they are looking at the front end. So the client-facing product side of it is receiving a lot of attention, and there's a lot of innovation happening in that space, with robo wealth advisory, for example, and so on. The back end, it's more difficult to justify. It's difficult for a bank to get excited about spending millions of dollars on a new AML system, right? It doesn't really sort of generate that much dollar value on the face of it. Also, it will save a lot of dollars, at the end of the day. The other thing is FIs are quite conservative with processes which relate to regulatory obligations. And that's, despite, some regulators being quite advanced in their understanding of the technology, like the MAS, you still need to demonstrate how your model will work. And in the case of AI, is that can be quite difficult. And I think some RegTech are getting better at explaining how their model work, and that will sort of enable banks to actually sort of use those models more easily. The other thing is, there is a lack of appetite in the banking industry, for failure. And the reality is very often when you implement these sort of systems, you don't have success straight away. It's a bit of a design thinking, sort of one step at a time, way of working to develop a system that will actually work at the end. And so if you're a manager like myself and you hire a RegTech and the first thing you come up with is not so good, your performance review at the end of the year is not going to be great, right? So that means that, and at HSBC, we do try to educate people on design thinking. We try to sort of take the fear of failure away from managers. We have like training around that as well for senior management. It's still there for most institutions that, your performance is going to be impacted if you don't succeed. So it's difficult to take a risk on a RegTech, when at the end of the day, maybe it will not deliver, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to put it back in the RegTech court, having spoken about all the failings of big corporation.
Yes.
I think one of the challenges is that RegTech do not always understand what are the actual challenges faced by FIs. Yes. And that means that the solution might be a great solution, but it doesn't necessarily sort of gel with what are the actual problems that FI have. And data quality is a key one for me. I've got a very good example where I did introduce a RegTech to the bank, and they came in and said, no problem, we can deal with data quality. They showed up, 3 weeks later, they gave up. and because they hadn't anticipated the complexity of our system and actually sort of how difficult data quality can be managed within a large organization that has 150 years of data, basically.
Yes.
So that's really sort of the key challenges that I see, to the adoption. All of them can be overcome, but
but it takes time, which is why, to my point earlier on, and I think the panel would agree as well, that whilst it's possible for the larger FIs or banks to actually get on this journey to explore, experiment, test, fail, and immune the people from failure, so to speak. And but also personally, like say, for example, the head of compliance or even the head of technology would be also questioned perhaps by the management whether, okay, if you're going to bring in these solutions for $250,000, does that mean that I'm going to cut my headcount by 10% or 20%? I mean, there's always that budget balance that needs to be worked on, that perhaps makes things somewhat equates into the too difficult bucket, and people may just park it depending on how much willpower they have. Now, I'm going to turn my attention to Trilochan here a little bit in terms of identity management. Daon, as a reputable identity management provider, and we hear that you only joined them for the last 3 months, which is fine. 3 months is a long time in a startup.
Exactly.
So no problem. Your learning curve is steep. But so my understanding of Daon is that it offers its solutions to lots and lots of organizations, including border control securities that are deployed at airports and immigration checkpoints. Now, do you think financial institutions in APAC, or maybe the smaller ones, actually need that level of industrial strength in carrying out identity verification procedures when they onboard a customer? To the extent of what you guys offer to the border control security purpose? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. A little more about Daon, right? And you have very rightly captured. Daon started as an organization which was providing biometric-based solutions to border controls, immigrations, and customers like that. But that was 20 years back. Right, 10, 12 years back, when we saw, enterprise, especially the large banks, moving towards digital banking, mobile banking, that a breadth of a biometric background we had was there to enable businesses for these customers, right? And here it was basically talking about three things, right? Building digital trust. When you move businesses to digital platforms, building digital trust. And in the background, what was also happening, our mobile platforms were becoming more stronger, right? A lot of transactions from old PCs to laptops, everything has come practically on a mobile platform, right? So with the evaluation of technology on the mobile front, with customers moving from, branch banking to digital banking, mobile banking about 10, 12 years back, we saw there was a very, very strong opportunity for us to, what we have, look at that as a base, but then, do a little more research to see how that fits into the enterprise. And we have done that very successfully. The last 10, 12 years, we have been working with a lot of large global banks. Royal Bank of Scotland is an enterprise customer, PNC in the US, ANZ Bank in Australia, SCB, tons of banks in Hong Kong. We have been working with them, right? And they have been using our biometric-based authentication platform. And more recently is talking about digital onboarding, right? The shift which we have seen, right, in last 2 years is so, digital onboarding, typically customer onboarding used to happen in branches, right? Where people will come in, fill in forms, those forms will be scrutinized, background checks will be done, ID checks will be done. Now, because of COVID situation, the banks and customers wanted this to be an online process. But even before that, right, last year itself, we saw trends where customers really wanted to move to an online platform. So, digital onboarding, doing eKYC checks became one of the other areas. And what we realize is biometrics is the right way of doing things, right? That gives you that trust. And what we do is we look at customers' biometrics, we look at their mobile devices, we look at their ID documents like passports and national IDs. We combine them together, we bind them together to offer a trusted digital identity, right? So it's not only one way of looking at things, but then looking at multi-dimensions to ensure that, the identity we have is more trusted.
Sure.
Coming to a second part, right? The smaller banks in APAC, as I said, the large banks, we have been working with them for almost 10, 12 years, right? And these are banks in all the leagues. We are seeing there's a lot of digital banks or digital only banks or neon banks which are coming up in the whole region here, right? And we had a lot of great success with working with VLab in Hong Kong, Mox in Hong Kong, Tonic Bank in Philippines. They just went live yesterday. And these are those very small banks who have just started from start, right? These are those startup fintech organizations backed by technology, not so much backed by banking, right? And they are getting into the financial space. What we have done from our side is made sure, our solutions are all cloud native. We offer SaaS-based pricing, we offer transaction-based pricing, so that it's easy for smaller banks to consume.
Okay.
And driving factors, right, when you talk about regulators, right, their expectations from these small banks is same as what they expect from the large banks. When it comes to customer protection, when it comes to security controls, when it comes to other compliance, expectations are same, right? So there is no reason why these smaller banks don't need these kind of solutions. And from our perspective, our pricing models have evolved, our, deployment models have evolved. We have made it to a point where even small company, which is a startup in this place, can consume it, the way they want to consume it and how much they want to consume it.
Okay, cool. Now, just gonna extend this conversation a little bit here and focus a bit more on okay, fine, if the larger ones are utilizing it, maybe like you said, RegTech exists, the concept of using technology to solve regulatory problem exists way back 20 years ago, and all that is fine. So banks are adopting and looking around with for more innovative solutions to do things better and get a better regulatory outcome, and all this are all good, and all the smaller ones are also following suit and doing stuff along the way, and even the neobanks, the newer ones are coming into the game with probably less burden on their shoulder, right? Which is always a better starting point, which is all good. Now, just focus a little bit on financial crime again here, and Alban and Trilochan can chip in. And of course, if he wants to chip in as well, no problem with that. Now, how do we strike a balance between not turning financial institutions into like an extension of the police department? Now, what I mean by police department, you include financial intelligence units and all that, in combating financial crime, and yet ensure that they do not unknowingly or intentionally facilitate money laundering through their organization. Now, the context of this question is this, yeah. There is a difference, in my view, between a police or maybe a financial intelligence unit doing an investigation or targeted investigation on, a perpetrated crime. Someone whether international syndicate of money laundering or drug offenses and whatever. It's a targeted investigation. Now, versus a bank or a financial institutions that are whose primary business is really to provide financial services, and if you have got super investigative tool that are applied to every transaction that your customer is doing, then in my view, it turns the financial institution almost to like an extension or a secondary department of the police force. And that's a very fine line, because one is law enforcement and the other one is actually performing customer due diligence so that they can say to the regulator that I've complied with the requirements. And I believe that nowhere in requirements dictates that financial institutions investigate every single transaction that comes through the platform. Now, you can agree or disagree. Alban, what do you think of this situation?
Yes, it's an interesting one, and I think technology is definitely key to solving this. If you take the current sort of environment where we do transaction monitoring and we review millions of transactions literally every year, it is actually quite unfair to customers, because 99% of those that we review actually are not suspicious transactions, and customers are just people going about their business. And so in the current setup, we do end up reviewing a lot of customers or asking customers questions, which can be quite intrusive. For me, technology and what RegTech is doing will allow us to target truly those people who are trying to use the financial system to launder money. And so for me, it's not really so much a dichotomy between being the police force and sort of being a bank. It's really sort of, if we can really target those people that actually are committing crime, then we don't end up being, an arm of the government. It's just good business sense. And I'll give you an example. In China, we've developed a anti-application fraud sort of AI, which allows us to predict with 99.8% accuracy whether a particular applicant is actually a fraudster or not. That means for the bank, it makes a lot of sense, because we don't have any fraudulent online application for credit cards.
Absolutely, so, that's good. That's a very effective preventive tool. Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. And but the other side, technology on its own is not enough. I think there needs to be more collaboration within the industry, but also with the police and the governments in terms of, because we exit one bad guy, he'll just go to the next bank.
Exactly.
Right. So that's not solving the problem. So I think from that perspective, technology is one key part of it, to make sure that we are more targeted and therefore we don't review sort of legit customers. And at the same time, we need more collaboration to ensure that when we do find something wrong, the industry and everybody else is aware of what's going on. And I think, we've seen development the last couple of years in Singapore in terms of collaboration between the industry and the police and the regulators, which is increasing. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Trilochan, you got anything to add on this point?
Yeah, I think I will agree to a lot of points which Alban made here, right? So if we really look about, the way, say, anti-money laundering was managed in the past, right? There was like close to $50 billion just in US, which was invested into managing anti-money laundering. But, what it was really catching was not even 1-2% of the overall, the risk which was there. Right. So, if you really look at one preventive approach, having technology which enables business, but at the same time, it takes care of all the security controls in the background. Right. So what we offer in this space is at the time of even customer due diligence process, right, customer getting onboarded, looking at their IDs, looking at whether those are spoofed or not, doing third-party checks, integration with the third-party databases. A lot of it is possible when, somebody is looking at a very, from a top view, and probably a regulatory body, probably a government entity, which provides that kind of an infrastructure. And lucky to be in Singapore, where we have such infrastructure where, doing an authentication against MyInfo, you can really find the background of any wrong person in the system here, right? So having that is really, really useful, right? And what we are seeing as a trend is, you go to Australia, you go to Hong Kong, you go to, any other developed country, a lot of these alliances are coming up, right? The government is taking proactive measures to make sure that the mandates are there, right? So this collaboration is definitely helping, preventive technologies, which enables business, but at the same time takes care of risk is important. Third, if you really look at, right, the whole base for RegTech is driven completely based on big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, mobile devices, right? A lot of this itself by its own nature is something which they do on their own. It's baked in the technologies, right? So we do not expect customers, especially the banks and all, they do police job, right? They should focus on their business, but the entire technology, the shift which is happening, that is there to make sure that, if there is any wrong person, any wrongdoing in the system that gets caught. And then that information is available to the other banks, other institutes, and other customers as well in the ecosystem. So I guess that's where it is.
Sure, I think that's right. And I mean, I'm just gonna say something a little bit controversial. I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong here, and great sharing, everyone. It's only that if you look at some of the large scale money laundering cases that have come to light, the likes of, say, for example, the issues with one MDB, for example. My view is not so much of or maybe not the banks themselves or the organizations do not know who they are dealing with. They very well know who they're dealing with. Now, whilst technology can help to an extent of identifying and tracing and stuff like that, if there is an intention to bypass technology, there is always the ability to do so. Which means that if they really set on facilitating that, at the end of the day, it's a human being, right? To facilitate that process of large whales or whoever they are. And it's not as if they do not know that they're dealing with a politically exposed person in that sense. Yeah, so that there are two sides to the coins is what I'm trying to say here. Whilst technology is great if you are using it properly, but at the end of the day, if the business or the organizations within the banks or the FIs themselves intentionally want to get around it, there's always a lot of ways to get around things. Now, leading on from what was mentioned by Trilochan about MyInfo, I'm just going to quickly ask Wansi here about her thoughts. Yeah. Now, we know that, and I know you don't speak on behalf of the entire GovTech and everyone else, but you're the closest that we can reach. So tough luck on that one. Now, we know GovTech has great plans to expand the use of MyInfo as a source of truth regarding residents' digital identity beyond public sector, and it has been used by banks. Just have the user approving and connecting to MyInfo, and then the data gets retrieved in a safe and secure fashion. Because what I'm trying to say is that whilst we probably can achieve a good success or a great outcome, given a relatively compliant population that we have here, about 5.5 million people, and going beyond Singapore, because digital onboarding or customer onboarding or financial services in Singapore do not just service Singaporean clients or Singapore-based clients. You service clients from Australia, from Malaysia, from the various places around the world, which means that whilst we can achieve success within this little island here, the benefit of having trusted source of truth of digital identity is great on a per country level. How do we get to the point whereby there could be some kind of like a government to government, MOU or collaboration or something along those lines, whereby information can be, or data for that matter, identity can be shared more seamlessly across borders without us having to jump through 10 fire hoops, if you know what I mean?
Okay, Yeah, it's a big topic actually. I mean, you're touching on not just about identity, right? It's about data, cross-border data flow.
You have 2 minutes to answer that question.
2 minutes, okay. So I'll just keep it very short, which means that I have to talk a little bit about what the government has done.
Yes.
But I think let's start first with first, if you want to be able to trust the data that's coming from another country, first you must trust the system that's in the other country, right? You must trust that the data that's collected there makes sense. So you can probably only work with countries for a start that has, at a G2G level, that has e-identity systems that you believe has collected data properly, you know, and that you can trust in terms of data coming through. So what
comparable levels and standards.
Yes, that's for a start, right?
Yes.
So what we have done is, actually, if you look up the digital economy agreements that we signed this year with Australia, New Zealand, Chile, one of the components in these digital economy agreements is actually e-identity as well, right?
Yeah.
How then do we, and we have signed an MOU Australia to talk about sharing experience and things like that, and then whether or not at some point then we can look at interoperability, data transfer and so on. But I have to say it's not so straightforward, because like I said, you have to make sure that the systems are comparable. You have to make sure that and other things then come in subsequently in terms of technology standards and interoperability. But maybe just taking this one step further, because your question was also really about, is it a government, a G2G arrangement? It's not necessarily just a G2G arrangement. If you think about other countries that do not have a comparable system, are we then able to rely on other types of institutions, banks, for example, in those countries to be able to offer this level of trusted data? So that's just something to think about beyond G2G. Yep.
Sure.
2 minutes.
Alban and Trilochan, any 1 minute thing to add on to that? Thoughts around, you know, cross-border digital identity, trusted source of truth that we can work on?
So from my point of view, right, working with various government entities and banks in the region here, right, this kind of initiative takes a lot of planning and a vision, right? We're lucky to be in Singapore, where, you know, our leaders, they look forward 10 years, 15 years, and they decide.
Yes.
My info is not my info, you know, which has been structured today. It goes back to 10 years when Singapore Corpus came into picture. You know, government started talking about this centralized identity for everyone, and then it has transformed to my info today, right? And they are able to offer this service not only to government entities but also to private sector. Now, you know, if you really look at other countries, you know, New Zealand is doing something similar, or Australia is also doing something similar. But, you know, trusting cross-border identity information, it is all about trust, right? If you look at recent pandemic, right, and when we are talking about opening our airports and airlines to countries, we're talking about only opening with the countries we trust, where we think they're managing processes well. Same goes with identity, right? Where there is a trust, where we know they're managing the systems and data as well, they're trusted well. Now, I think initiative should be on the countries which are slightly lacking behind, to learn from, you know, what Singapore is doing, what New Zealand is doing, what Australia is doing in the region, and step up their game, right? And a lot of effort has to come in from visionaries in the government and in public sector, in hands with, you know, the analyst firms, the consulting companies, and also, you know, other private sector players.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's one part of it. I mean, whilst a lot of times for digital identity, you know, that typically from a customer onboarding or AML perspective, there are 3 documents that we typically would accept. You know, the regulators around the world, or FATF, says that we can accept, which is international passport, national ID, government issued national ID, or the driver's license, which is probably ranked the least amongst the 3. Now, I would have thought that the first one is just a food for thought, you know, no response needed. But the international passport being already at a ISO standard across the world, or people issuing international passports, would probably be a sensible starting point to get it, you know, the paper-based, the booklet-based thing onto a digital fashion or a digital format, such that you don't actually need to carry a passport around, because these days you don't carry boarding pass as well. It's all in your phone, you know. So perhaps that is one way that, you know, people, or from a G2G or at the G20 level, can think about. And I don't think there's any G20 participant here, so that's why I'm talking to the air. That's something that, you know, over time, I think that can evolve into something that probably a easier starting point than to try to reinvent every country's national ID system. Just a thought. Now, just to conclude, I think we've sort of hit the dot in terms of timing, but very quickly, about 10-20 seconds each, if I can ask for the panelists' thoughts and gaze into their crystal ball and make a prediction of the future of RegTech in maybe 2025. Alban.
Look, I think, no surprise, I think it's just going to accelerate. I think we're going to see a rate of embracing RegTech sort of increase. And as successes materialize and in my space, FI start saving millions of dollars because of the adoption of the new technology, it will continue to mature, and we will see it used in more and more areas, not just AML, but also, sort of other areas of compliance. So that's my prediction. Not taking all of this here.
No problem. Trilochan, very quickly.
Yeah, so till 2025, adoption rate going up to almost 30% year on year, more API based, RegTech reporting rather than quarterly manual reporting, where regulators see information real time. They can analyze risk. They can do, artificial intelligence on it and predict, up to some level rather than react to issues coming in. So I guess those are some of the good things I really expect, RegTech to help in the next few years.
Excellent. Wan Si, last but not least.
So very quickly, I'll just add on to what the other panelists have said. Maybe in 2025, when we have this conversation, we will be focusing not just on financial services, but other sectors as well. That's one. And then secondly, then we have more adoption among the smaller companies, not just among the big boys. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Now, thank you all. That has been discussed with the panelists here today. And I think I'll conclude the panel now, and I'll pass the time over back to AJ.